Welcome to the session on invisible, or we might call them hidden or missing constraints in market system and women's economic empowerment. For those who don't know me, my name is Jodie Thorpe. I'm a research fellow at the Institute of Development Studies, and I also am part of the BEAM team, as we seem to call ourselves, leading the research program at BEAM. The research program really is about filling knowledge gaps, but I think particularly trying to bridge between some of the theoretical insights and some of the very practical experiences that is represented by the people in the room, and a lot of our research is co-developed with practitioners. You'll be pleased or not pleased, I'm not sure which, to know we're not presenting our research today. We're instead going to be drawing on the experiences of a very well-qualified panel, but the session is inspired by some of the research we've been doing recently, which is focused on, we've got a couple of pieces particularly focused on women's economic empowerment, but within that, what we've called non-economic constraints. And I think by that we mean that if you look back even 3, 4, 5 years, there's been a huge growth and interest and activity around women's economic empowerment in market systems. I think a lot of the activity has addressed some of the very concrete business constraints, access to finance, access to business skills and technical training, but that there is an important area of, as I say, what we're calling non-economic factors that also very much influence the way that women engage in markets and the way that markets interact with women. And the research that we've been commissioning, one has focused on unpaid care work, the sort of household care and reproductive activities that often fall to women that affect their ability to engage in markets. And on your tables, I've put around the policy brief that's come out of this research, which has just been published. If not everyone has one, we'll have some more tomorrow at the Knowledge Arena. We also have a piece of work which is focusing on social norms and trying to understand how better to identify constraints related to social norms, to plan for change, and to go past individual behavioral change to really look at systemic change related to social norms. And that piece of work is being done by Market Share Associates and will be published in the next sort of month, 6 weeks' time. Finally, BEAM's also publishing the new WEAMS framework. This is the update of the M4P Women's Economic Empowerment Framework, and that will be coming out in the next few weeks. So I think this is a really timely session for us in relation to the research that we've been doing in this area. Before I introduce the panel, though, I want to just mention a few, they're not really housekeeping, but a few things I'm told to request or inform you. Firstly, on your tables, you probably would have had them this morning as well, we have these placemats, we're calling them, just encouraging people where it strikes you that there's some really interesting insights or quotes or things you hadn't heard or disagree with, as well as any suggestions for BEAM to be following up on. We just invite you to jot them down here and leave them behind, and we'll collect them at the end. So that's kind of helping to shape our thinking. As Bushra mentioned this morning, if you put your names on it, then they'll be put into a draw where you can win a year's subscription to Enterprise Development and Microfinance Journal. So there's an incentive for you. But I don't think you have to put your name if you don't want. Then also, we've got a sign-up sheet. This is if you want to continue the conversation from today. In other words, if you're interested in these issues and want to continue engaging with BEAM around them. So, for example, the research I mentioned, when it gets published, we can actually reach out to you and let you know it's available. We'll be having a webinar after the research on social norms is published, and we can let you know about that. Again, not obligatory, but I'll be passing this around and invite you to sign up if you're interested. And finally, just to encourage you, you've been seeing your voting cards in earlier sessions, to have them handy. We won't use them too much, but we'll use them once or twice. All right, time for me to stop and to pass you over to a very experienced panel. Can I introduce, firstly, Kevin Conroy. Kevin's team leader for Enable in Nigeria, a program that's working particularly on advocacy approaches and business environment. We have Christina Ruiz, excuse me, from Twin Trading. And she'll be really bringing us a business perspective on some of these issues and why businesses care about women's economic empowerment and her experiences working with coffee producers in East Africa. And finally, Nurul Siddiqui. Siddiqui is a technical advisor on sustainable agriculture with CARE in Bangladesh. And he'll be drawing on some of the work they do. And finally, I'll introduce our moderator for today, Linda Jones. Many of you will know Linda. She's an expert on women's economic empowerment and market systems. She's advised many donors and programs in this area. And she's recently rejoined MEDA as the Senior Director for Global Programs. So Linda.
Okay. Thank you. I feel like I've got a lot of things to manage here with this microphone, but hopefully I'll get through it. Anyway, thank you very much for the introductions, and thank you all for being here. I'm just going to give a wee bit of an introduction before I ask some questions of the panel and about their experience. But really, just a little bit of background on social norms. I think Jody provided a little bit of an introduction to that. But the one thing I wanted to say was things in market systems programs, it has been a long time in coming. If we think about, you know, the original operational guidance for M4P back in 2003, 2004, and there wasn't really any guidance on gender until the WE M4P framework that came out in early 2012. And so that was quite 8 years in coming. And I think the reason why it really ended up coming out was there was a lot of pressure on Springfield and on the donors to provide guidance on gender mainstreaming in M4P programs. And the reason that came out, from what I understood from field programs, was, you know, they were using the M4P framework. It was gender neutral or maybe gender blind, and there was a lot of challenges integrating women into programming, and programs didn't know, staff didn't know what to do and how to do it. So the M4P WE framework was prepared. There were programs that were attempting things and doing some great work. ALCP from Georgia, Helen's here, she'll be commenting later on. They were already doing some really interesting work, but it hadn't been really codified and shared, and there wasn't a dialogue. Well, that was just early 2012. 4 years later, we have quite a large growing literature on women's empowerment in market systems, and we've gone beyond the economic issues. It started with, well, maybe we can take a gendered lens looking at the economic issues. But over time, and not that much time, it was realized that a lot of the economic uptake on the part of women is related to the social norms that surround them. So issues like mobility, segregation, roles, controls, voice, choice, decision-making, workload, social sanctions, and the way that they interact, the dynamics within the household or within the communities. So now programs have begun to look at these social norms and how they impact programming. In some cases, market systems programs are actually designing interventions that take this into consideration. In other cases, mitigating for social norms. In other cases, merely reporting on them, and in some cases, of course, still ignoring them. But I hope if you're here today, you're already thinking about this, and you'll be inspired by our speakers who will be able to talk about their experiences and what they're actually already doing on the ground. Because things are definitely moving forward, and it's an expectation of the donors that we deal with these issues beyond the fact. Of course, we all know it's a human right for women to be economically empowered and engaged along with their male counterparts. And we also know that women's contribution to the household, the community, the national and the global economy is absolutely critical as we move forward. So to talk about their experiences, I'll first turn to Christina. Can you just give us a brief introduction of what you're doing and some of your issues, and then I'll pose a few questions to you as well.
Can I stand, or should I? It's better I sit for the camera. No? Well, I sit then. Well, so I want to explain a bit between what it is. It's a trading and a coffee trading company within a charity. So it's a bit of a strange composition there. So all our interventions are informed by the coffee market demand. So what I want to explain here is that we can make a business case for women empowerment. So it's a business case. It's not only the social side and why we should be working on gender. It's just more of it's a demand from the market. So what we want to do with that is looking at doing a structural transformation of how coffee market is looking at coffee market system is looking at the role of women. We want to work at a scale, and for that, for example, we are partnered with the Trademark East Africa, what, as you know, is a big trade organization in East Africa. And with them, we are trying to get this at a scale, really looking at how we can really transform the coffee market sector by that. So what I mean by business case is a business case for the buyers. So our buyers, they want this women coffee. We produce coffee grown by women alone. And this is a product that has high demand on the specialty market. Coffee, recently we did a research on why they demand this product. And 95% of the buyers, they will say they demand this product because of the quality, because they found that women's coffee has a much higher quality, because the way the women have been trained to produce this level of quality. And so for them, they want more of that. So for that, there is a clear business case to get more of this coffee on that level of quality. For the producer organization, that's also a business case, because what they want is they want to have more members, they want to have more volume of coffee going through the washing stations, and they want better quality. So involving women in the coffee production, that brings all these solutions, because that gives them more members. So these women, they are members on their own rights, so they can double the number of members. They bring them more quality, and they bring them more volumes. If I take an example, for example, Muzuzu Coffee Cooperative, a big cooperative union in Malawi, talking with the director of the cooperative, I was asking him, so why do you have women in coffee program? I said, well, you know, I'm a businessman. So for me, all this kind of gender, all these nice things about, don't talk to me about this. I want my business. So I want to have more members. I want to have better quality, more volumes. So we start this Women in Coffee program. We encourage men to make a land ownership agreement with their wives so they can be members. So more members for us. And we have increased our sales of this women coffee from like 7,000 kilos to 55 tons in like 2 seasons. So for me, that's business for me. So then there are other benefits that come, but the main driver is a business case. Just quickly, another good example is on quality, saying that Bukonso joined a cooperative in Uganda. They increased the quality of coffee in 4 years I don't know how familiar you are with the scoring on coffee, but from 75 to 87.5, what is like one of the highest quality. And this is thanks to the gender work. So, yeah.
Okay, no, that's great. And yeah, it's really super that you've been able to make the business case, because of course in a market systems program that's absolutely critical, and particularly working with private sector partners. But in that process, did you encounter any challenges in working with women due to social norms? You mentioned about the land transfer. I imagine that involves some issues around traditional rights, or were there other social norms on the end of working with women?
I mean, for us, the driver is that market demand. So for us was like, okay, how we can make the business case. And then by bringing this business case into practice, that has really dealt with social norms that they look to be like a big barrier. For example, land ownership. Yeah. Some countries, women, they don't have access to land. But then the cooperative are thinking, okay, how I can get these women to have land? Okay, let's ask the husband to have like joint land agreements so they can have their women to be members. And that resolves a constraint that otherwise maybe it's very difficult to approach it. But from that kind of business point of view, it makes sense. So it goes, and it happens. So
there wasn't an issue in the household around that. Men saw the business value themselves. And
of course, at the household level, there is a lot of work to do. So like Twin works at household level, producer organization level, and market level. So all these interventions at market level, like this women coffee product, needs to be accompanied with some household level analysis. And so we have all these participatory tools with household level members. They sit together, they look at their coffee farm as a business, and they have a vision journey they want to go together. And this is the way we manage to kind of navigate through these
so
norms
you had to
and
get right
barriers.
down to the household level and get involved almost in that negotiation between the husband and wife. Not maybe in the negotiation,
not that, but the cooperative.
Influence it and and you use the gals.
We use the
tool?
gals methodology, which is a participatory
Okay.
methodologies on that.
And in the other direction, when the women were selling coffee to the cooperative and increasing their income, did you see any shifts in social norms as a result of your work?
Yeah, I saw a huge shift on social norms. I mean, for me, I come more from the development side, working for about 20 years with NGOs, a bit more outside of the kind of trade and market concepts, and I can see the impact of this kind of work where there is a business case and people see that as a business. The impact in changing norms is huge. Because the family member, they see their coffee farm as a business and they say, okay, how I can make more money, how we can work better together. So they have a clear motivation and to break barriers and to change norms. So yeah, huge impact.
Okay. Well, Christina, we'll come back to you in a minute, but I want to give Kevin and Siddiqui a chance to speak. So Kevin, can you maybe give us just a bit of background on what you're doing very specifically around women's empowerment as
I'd
well as
love
overall?
to. I'd love to. Can I use the cards first as well? Is that okay? And can I stand?
Yeah. Yes, you
all
may.
right, thank you. Just for my own benefit, we're an advocacy program. We work on improving the ability of our partner organizations like BMOs, CSOs, faith-based organizations to advocate for change. So who in this room thinks that advocacy is critical to market systems reform, whether that's a sector reform or whether that's a business environment reform? So if you think it's yes, definitely, green. Amber if a maybe, and red if no, it's not really important. I can do this through economic means. Great, my job's easy. So there's only 2 people in the room I have to convince by the end of my speech that advocacy is absolutely critical. Second question, this is, now just put your hands up. I'm going to give you 3 choices. The question is, who is driving your interest and your targets for women's economic empowerment? Is it coming from the donors, such as DFID or USAID? Is it coming from the implementing partners, such as Springfield, who've had a lot of research and approaches to this? Or is it coming from your own program, your leadership in your team? So if you think it's coming from the donors, can you raise any card? Okay. 1, 2, 3, and I notice actually some people from DFID are putting their hands up, so that's why. If you think it's coming from the implementing partners, can you raise your card? Okay, so no one really feels it's coming from them. Is it coming from your program? Okay, great. And am I missing anything? Well, this was a trick question because I think everyone's wrong. I think none of those answers are right. For me, I'll let you have a guess. Who do you think the drive for women's economic empowerment should come from? From women? Yeah. I mean, women, any particular sector or class of women? Just women in general, so it should be women who are pushing forward, maybe saying that they should be the ones, I demand this, I need this is unfair, this is actually, I'm actually being constrained here. Anybody else? From the market? So maybe the market dynamics purely through economic means may empower women, allow them to affect change. That's good. Someone else? All of the above? Great. I think we're getting there. Any final ones? No one said government? Yeah, the amount of government gender policy strategies I've seen in Nigeria that never come off the shelf. I don't think it's our host governments without working very closely with, in my opinion, close to the women but partners or women organizations. For me, advocacy organizations need to be pushing the agenda because donors change priorities, implementing partners change, and programs come to an end. So in order to see sustainable women's economic empowerment, for us, it's about helping our partners in Nigeria take on that burden, take on that challenge, and push it themselves so that when we do step back and roll back, then really they're charging forward with the agenda. So I think I've went on a bit longer than I planned to, but I'll just mention 3 things of what we do. We work with business organizations, civil society organizations to improve their advocacy. We do this through helping them to understand their constraints, to actually identify. Usually when we walk into a business organization and say, what's your constraint? They'll say, oh, it's power. We say, okay, everyone says power, but actually a lot of other companies are doing very well without power. You know, they often lack the understanding and nuance of what is the real constraint they face. We help them understand this constraint by helping them and supporting and facilitating research so they can articulate their views and actually bring them forward to basically formulate a proposal to government. Then they engage in advocacy. Through that advocacy, they look to change policy and regulations and administrations. Some real successes that we've seen in Nigeria has been working with women's groups, women's organizations. I think the first one I've left on your tables is with a women's organization called Quintessential Business Women's Association of Nigeria. They're very much an elite women's organization. They're very well organized, they're very articulate. They don't have that much grassroots ground support, but they work very hard. And we worked with them. They understood that they had a problem with finance. They're male partners and were often getting access to funds quicker than their members and their women members. We worked with them to articulate that problem, take that to the Central Bank of Nigeria, gather data to show that women were actually better at paying back loans than men were, showing them actually through their association was much better organized than some of their male counterpart associations, traditional big BMOs such as the manufacturers associations. And through that advocacy they were able to engage and win a concession from the Central Bank of Nigeria to issue discounted subsidized loans to over 15,000 of their members. So they were able to articulate why they were different, why they faced a particular constraint, how it was different from what men faced, and actually to overcome that through engaging in advocacy. A second example, before I wrap up, is this, which you also see here. Please don't take them home, I have to take them back to the office. But this is a Women in Business page. A few years ago, this is from Daily Trust, the largest national newspaper in Nigeria. A few years ago, this was just a tiny column called Women in Business. It was published probably on a monthly basis, but through partnering with Daily Trust to overcome that social norm that women shouldn't be involved in business, it's now a weekly supplement. It's published every week. It's moved away from, oh, I'm the wife of the president, let's do a piece on me, to actually talking about the grassroots issues that business women's organizations bring to them and discuss, and talk about what the actual constraints are on the ground. We still have more work to do here. We need to get some advertising around this supplement. We need to extend it into a couple more pages and make it a regular occurrence in the northern press as well, northern Nigeria, which is Hausa speaking. So finally, a really exciting initiative that we're working on, working with some grassroots organizations in Kaduna, which is in the middle belt of northern Nigeria. We're working with a group which, until a few years ago, was even scared, their members were scared even to go into a bank. Many of them had never spoken to a government official before. But through working with them, coaching, instilling that confidence, that leadership, the organizational prowess which is needed to deliver effective advocacy, to do strategy development, to do stakeholder mapping, they've now came together and approached the Ministry of Women Affairs to put forward what they call the Gender and Business Platform. This platform is very much like this. It's businesswomen, businessmen, governor, ministers, directors in a room on a panel such as this, talking about the issues that women face and why they're particularly different from what their male counterparts see. Now, through this establishing of this platform, it's now going to be held on an annual basis. There's a lot more discussion about the constraints women face, and then now the governors came out and basically designed a particular loan package for the women groups working in Kaduna. Now, we will be there to support and ensure that that loan package is administered effectively, that it's done through consultation with these women groups. But I think it really does show that if you strengthen the role of advocacy within women's associations in the countries that we work in, that can actually affect policy change at the national level. So thank you very much. Yeah, good.
Okay, so that was great background, Kevin, and some really good examples of the specific things you're doing. So I won't drill down more on that right now, but I'll move on to Siddiqui. And can you just give us an overview, and then we'll maybe drill a little deeper on the social norm aspect?
Yeah. I do have a few questions, but I'll start with the household level. We were into advocacy and the co-ops. My questions, I think the first question is, pardon me if it is too personal. In your home, how many of us actually involve our spouses to make a key decisions as the household that we used to take it alone? So I see a lot of green. Yes, we do. Yeah, we used to take decisions alone before, but we now involve our spouses. Okay, the second question is, do you discuss financial decisions? key financial decisions at the households. Great. You're really flexible and very good. So these are exactly the kind of questions, in some of our programs that we want to, kind of outcome also from this sort of, questions when we work around agriculture and market systems at CARE, dealing with, a lot of value chains in a lot of different countries with hundreds of thousands of women farmers in particular. But the irony is that the staff or the market players, for example, the extension agents or community-based, trainers, when we ask them about these sort of indicators, it seems like, the picture we see that, we actually don't discuss these, important decisions at the households. Or what we heard from some of our staff that is actually create a lot of chaos in the household if you want to discuss this level of financial issues, because they're broader issues, there are joint families, different sort of thing. I think the discussion I want to highlight today is how, for us who want to have greater outcome from our market system, work around outcome like, influencing household decisions or enabling environment, change levers around women access to productive resources, and, some of those other non-economic constraints that put a lot of barriers to women empowerment. How can, as organization, we can actually build our staff capacities and some of the tools that we can use to accelerate that?
Yeah, maybe you could explain that to us a bit further. What are some of the ways you're building the staff capacity and the tools you're using, and how does that actually play out?
Okay, I think the first interesting thing we did is that how this dimensions or phenomenon works in a farming households are not very different that, how they works within, some of those staffs or frontline staffs or extension agents. So we took example of, let's say, how do we manage performance of a farming a group of producers, or let's say an individual farmer against certain performances. It could be around, the agriculture season, or it could be around number of different other aspects. For example, how they're doing around nutrition, or their access to market issues and others. So if some of us work in, let's say, in farmer field school, for example, or we have now a lot of different versions of farmer field and business schools, farmer field business and climate schools. There are a lot of schools around where we want to, create a knowledge plot for farmers, and we go through a certain evaluation. So we took some of those examples from the ground and create a tool that, how about creating a personal performance tracker for our staff? Because it's going to be the same sort of performances, but the indicators are different, like, for example, those decision-making abilities within the households, or, there are broader issues like, do you really support child marriage? Or do you really support, or you want to discourage circumcisions, which are, which have a lot of, I think, a critical impact on women's individual capacity and with their environment. So once we apply those tools with, let's say, our staff for a period of 6 months, and we go back into the data and see like the changes, the critical or the difficult things that we see is really around the decision making, that it actually doesn't change even, after 6 months. It actually remains in the state that it was. But we do see a lot of changes around indicators. For example, we love to encourage others that please do this, is very good. So you encourage others to be more proactive, or for women voice, or for example, yes, what we hear from our staff that yes, from now on, I will actually discourage all sort of, negative sort of activities or things like child marriage. Those have, in my community or maybe in my family as well. So these are like the performance, participatory performance tracker. It's a kind of tool that, we can apply to see like, how these behaviors changes along the time. And we also have learned that, that this very, kind of monitoring the behaviors actually triggers some of those changes as well.
Okay, so you're seeing the gender norm or social norm shifting amongst your staff as a result of them applying these gender behavior change tools in the communities. That's interesting. Okay, so we have three quite different scenarios here. In terms of the coffee trading, we actually have Christina, your organization going into the communities and the households and doing gender sensitization. So you're actually working on shifting norms to enable the transfer of land and then to enable greater engagement of women in the market system, which is beneficial for everyone. In your case, Kevin, you have women in business and you're helping them build their confidence, build their capacities so they're able to take on advocacy roles themselves. And once the program is over, presumably that capacity, that empowerment, that's really voice in particular, they will be able to continue. And I assume there's negotiation and so on in there. And then Siddiqui, you're looking at affecting behavior change in the households and in the communities, and while you're doing that, you're also having a result of changing the behavior and actually your staff internalizing. They're not just preaching, they're actually internalizing the changes too. So that's interesting. So maybe drilling a little bit deeper on that connection between the shifting social norm and the market system approach. When you talk to businesses, do you still keep that very much on a business level, or is there some level of conversation around social norms, or do you still completely avoid that and the social norm change is really at the household and community level? I'm kind of curious how that has evolved, or yeah, if you can.
When you say talking about business, I will assume I'm talking to coffee buyers, sure. International.
Yeah.
So we did recently a survey. In fact, we asked 100 roasters why they buy women's coffee. So yeah, as I say, 95% they buy because of the quality. So they say for them that's what is there for them. Great. And some of them they don't even market it as women's coffee. Just they buy because it's good quality, and then they will market as a top quality coffee. So in that case, they don't really know or care about the social norm behind. Yeah. Some of them, they say, what we like about women's coffee is the story behind. We want to understand how that impacts women. So what I mean, business, they are not all the same. I think they all have their starting point. They're all more like ethical. They are all more like on the quality side. So I think it's very difficult to generalize. And I think some people, they have a starting point at different levels. The same with coffee cooperatives. Some of them, they started gender programs because of the business, as I say the story of Mzuzu in Malawi. Some of them, like in Rwanda, they have more like supporting widows from genocide and all that more social level, breaking norms, and then they go into the more women's coffee and all the market level. So different starting points, but they all have a huge impact on the communities through that kind of more market approach. Yeah.
So that's interesting how the intermediary, the cooperative, comes from a different place than the buyer. Well, I mean, maybe that would be anticipated. But in general, with the buyer, you're just talking business still. While recognizing that to engage women in the market system, you still may have to do that underlying social norm, social change work, but with the ultimate goal of having a strong business connection and facilitating that, but not engaging the business partner in that.
In some cases, they do engage.
Okay.
So in some cases, buyers, they want to come to Origin and visit this community, engage. For example, an interesting activities we did last month, in fact, is to have a girls session, what is this methodologies of household level, in the US with the buyers. So they understand when we talk about girls, what we mean. So in fact, we brought some of our facilitators from East Africa, from Kigali, to the US, and they were doing girl sessions with them. So some of them, they really want to engage. And also because Twin is all about connections and people, so it's a small group, a small organization. And so for us, it's building those bridges and building those relationships. Some of them, they really want to understand exactly how we work at household level, how we work at producer organization level. Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting to hear how you work differently at each level in the market system. And so, Kevin, I guess I would like to ask you a similar question. You talk quite a bit about how you develop women's capacity in terms of advocacy and so on. And these are women in business. How has that impacted their business or their engagement with other businesses? Or maybe even if you have any stories about some of these women and the kind of business they're in and how this has affected them. Is that a fair question?
Yeah, I think I could come at that from a few angles. I'll probably start with about 3 or 4 years ago, I was sitting with 8 women from Kano, northern Nigeria, Muslim women who were in pure water, making sachet water. Some were in small fisheries and agro-processing. And I had at that time I had a gender advisor in the room as well. And it was very strange for these women to be sitting with a man in the room discussing their businesses. And the gender advisor said, so we're here today to just discuss how we can improve your decision making in the home. And I said, no, we're not. We're here to talk about how to grow their businesses. And there was definitely a rouse of real interest and passion there. But still this question keeps coming, how do you choose where to spend your income? Who controls your income? Who decides which child should go to school? And one message that came and really resonated with me and why I really love doing this is all the women unanimously agreed, if I can make more money and I can keep that money, I can grow my business, I can decide who in the house, which child goes to school or both go to school. I can decide what that income will be spent on, and that's really the passion that we take forward. In terms of working on advocacy and how we, how that changes businesses, yes, this CAWIF, Kaduna Women's Economic Advancement Forum, are grassroots. They're market traders. They're mostly in urban Kaduna, and some agri-processing as well. In order to understand the constraints that their business faced, and a bit like one of the speakers was speaking earlier, we didn't go and say you need to change your your processes to save you money in this way. We didn't go and say, look, you're being undermined by this policy of the government. We said you need to go and talk to your members, your rural, your semi-urban and your urban members, and ask them what they're really constraining. Document that. We'll help you do that research, but understand where you're coming from, and that'll give you a much more powerful position for when you advocate and talk to government. So you don't just look like you're, the most educated woman in the LGA. You don't really know what your members think, but you're actually talking about the real issues your business face. Another way that we do this is we link groups together. So we see that there's often small women cooperatives or small women organizations in a local government or a state level, and there's often more elite-based national women's groups. We really encourage them to start working together, so that at the national level they can leverage the networks, they can be more articulate, they have a bit more funds to invest in advocacy, but as I said, they often lack the touch of the common business women, whereas the smaller grassroots associations can bring that authenticity, can bring that voice, and bring that mass numbers that's needed to really rally for change. I'm not sure if that answered your question exactly,
no,
but
well, it does answer it, at least in part, but actually it raises another question. When you brought the more elite women together with the more grassroots women, did you find there was interest on both sides to have that connection? Was there a willingness to engage? Did they see a benefit, or they wanted to do that for whatever reason? What was that experience like?
I think it does come down to incentives, and the ones I just mentioned it offered the more elite organization a chance to expand their membership and more authenticity, and then for grassroots it offered maybe greater voice and greater network. So it has to date worked well. I mean, we've only done it twice now, and we've also linked women's organizations with traditional trading associations as well, and that's also worked very well. So we are seeing it moving in the right direction. We haven't come against any kind of clash of cultures yet.
Well, certainly networking for women is definitely a very important path to empowerment, so it sounds really positive. So Siddiqui, Actually, I think it would be interesting. I mean, a lot of your work before you joined CARE USA was in strengthening the dairy value chain in Bangladesh, working very closely with women in that. And I think some of the examples you were talking about relate directly to that. But I don't think everybody in the room probably knows about that project. And it'd be interesting if you could just explain a little bit about that, well, the two phases of that project and what your gender goals were and what you've achieved, you know, not just in raw numbers, but in terms of some specifics around changing roles and attitudes and so on. Would you?
Yeah. So the dairy project in Bangladesh is an 8-year project. It's coming to an end of this year, but we worked nearly 50,000 smallholder dairy producers. And the goal was really to improve productivity, but at the same time access to inputs, markets, you know, enabling environment as well. And by design, we actually reached a lot of women. And I don't think that from the very beginning, we actually were really ready to, you know, to address all the different sort of constraints or challenges that come up when by design you involve women in a lot of untraditional role. Let's say it's not just about producers, but also like, you know, higher in the value chain, for example, as service providers or artificial inseminator, which are really non-traditional roles from Bangladesh perspective for women. And there is a lot of you know, community perspective to that. Some of the you know, tools, for example, identifying the different barriers or understanding you know, intra-household relations or perspective to women's new role really helped us to design, like, you know, how do you better respond to you know, these situations. So what we've seen as a shift, like, you know, how women can be successful in those different service providers roles as well, and how, you know, key private sector processors, for example, who are purchasing milk from those women groups, also encouraged to establish more transparent system into the last mile at the village level, so that women actually can participate in those you know, in those roles as a recognized farm producers as well. So what we see in the phase 2, that we could get key private sector partners who are actually willing to invest and actually expand their supply chain with you know, with including new technologies that actually offers more transparent pricing, but at the same time, at the very village level, their collection centers actually act as a kind of information provision centers as well, where women can learn a lot around, you know, what going around the sectors, or, you know, the different informations that are provided on the particular produce they're doing.
So in phase 2, where you have this last mile and reaching out, well, I have a couple questions there. Out of your 50,000, what percentage of your ultimate results will be with women out of the 50,000 that you targeted? How many of those will be women?
All of them.
Oh, okay. So 50,000 women integrated into more modernized dairy value chains, correct? Because now they're selling to collection centers, the milk is being processed and so on. So all 50,000 are women. But it sounds like in the second phase you were more intentional about what you did with regard to gender mainstreaming, whereas in the first phase it was more, that was your target, and then you learned what your challenges were. And then in the second phase, based on your learnings, you could be more intentional in how you dealt with the business partner for expansion. Is that correct?
Yeah, in the first phase, I think we did a lot of pilots and with different processors. Some of them actually, some of the processors actually denied to join the phase 2 because they thought like changing to a new system would actually bring a lot of risk to their current supply chains, and also, you know, investing in those last mile would be a burden. But I think what we could then establish is like with one partner, what do you learn, and how you can bring others, important players in the sector, to learn from them. So what we see that the transparent system is a kind of demand from the different producer groups now, and it has been expanded by not only horizontally that more farmers are demanding that, but also like the different processors who feels like if they want to have their kind of competitive advantage or keep their competitive advantage in the market, they also need to introduce the same systems. So we see as a sector-wide change that actually helps bring these businesses closer to those villages where women do almost 100% of the dairy work.
Okay, and that's the dairy hub model you're talking about, which is being adopted as a standard now?
Well, the dairy hub is not. It's once we started talking about the hub, it's really different from how hub model are, let's say, adopted by a processor. Okay. So there would be a lot of infrastructures, cooling machines here and there, and how they aggregate all those. But I think from CARE perspective, the hub was around three key areas. One is that how do you establish very strong producer groups? And the second one is really how do you bring this market close to the producer group so they have clear access to more incentive-based market. And then the third is really to create the right kind of access to inputs as well, because that was what is needed for very poor producers who need to have cash on a daily basis to buy inputs for cows. So there's three triangles. Once we see that they function more effectively, we see that that the hub model really works pretty well. So I think the perspective is different, that how this is seen. But once we look into how the private sector kind of collaborates both in the access to inputs and the markets as well, and they do have roles around identifying let's say productive areas, or more or around solving problems like what their key clients are facing. So we see a lot of value that these private sectors are having through connecting these three dots as well.
But ultimately, the processors, they're just concerned. Well, their main concern is the development of greater supply of raw milk for processing, and they've realized that by adapting their model, integrating more women, they're going to be much more successful in their business.
And more on quality.
More
because again, I think what Christina was emphasizing, the quality has been the the highest impact from their perspective, because it's quite a competitive market. And most of the processors were facing around the challenges around quality. So these new collection centers were actually providing the highest quality milk from any standards in the country.
Great. Okay. All right. Well, we are going to turn it over to the audience to ask some questions in a minute. But first, I'd like to ask each of our panelists to make a final comment. I'm sure probably all of you have something that you didn't get asked or you'd like to say. So maybe, Christina, do you have like a 2-minute comment, or would you prefer that I just ask you a very specific question?
Ask me.
Okay, so for you as an implementing agency, integrating women into a value chain in a viable way and making the business case, what would you say your one of your greater challenges was, like where you had to work hardest or overcome a capacity or some kind of internal or feasibility issue?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge for us is the scale. So I think this kind of activities are quite intense, so you have to work at all these different levels. You have to, processing women's coffee with coffee grown by women, that means they need to have separate facilities for women and for men to come with the cherry, process it separate. So it's quite a lot of work we have to put into that. Then working at household level, addressing all these norms, working at the producer organizational level with gender policies, why did all that. So the scale is an issue, that how many producer organizations you can target. So I think for us that why is when we are partnering with organizations like Trademark East Africa, big organizations who can really bring that level of scale, or just changing the way the whole coffee industry sees women, so that can really like make big changes in the market system. So I think that's
how many women producers through the cooperatives are involved in this initiative now?
Well, I will not know a figure like that at the moment, but yeah, we have kind of indicators, and we try to progress on that.
How many cooperatives are you working with?
So we are working in East Africa. We are working with 10.
Okay.
But now we are scaling up, like with this new project with Trademark is 20 more. So we are really scaling up quite rapidly.
Okay.
So
all right. And each cooperative would have?
We have like maybe, I mean, the idea is that half of them, at least the members, are women, so they will have.
Okay. Yeah. Great. Thank you. And I guess maybe, Kevin, for you, I could ask you about the challenge, your greatest challenge, but if there's something else that you think is especially interesting that hasn't been raised, please feel free. Sorry.
Thank you. When you mentioned the final point, that's what came to my head, the challenges. I mean, I've spoke about some examples of successes here. I think there's two major challenges in advocacy. One is government. I think our government is often under capacity, under motivated, and work in difficult contexts as well. But we also see that, particularly in northern Nigeria, below the kind of political positions of governor or commissioner, there's a natural suspicion sometimes that donors have a pro-women stance, and that they're coming here to undermine some traditional cultural or social norms. So understanding that and being a program that can have a diverse portfolio of working with different groups definitely helps us when we do work with women's associations, but it is one of the challenges we face. And secondly, policy and regulatory changes on paper are difficult to achieve, but ensuring they're rolled out and actually affect people's lives requires these associations to keep on advocating after they have an achievement, to make sure that they hold government to account and achieve that implementation. So I think over the program's only a year and a half old now. One of the main drivers is to ensure that we can get from policy change to actually implementing.
Okay. Great. Siddiqui? On the constraint, or else, unless there's something else you wanted to mention that we didn't talk about, either would be fine.
I think one of it's not about the dairy program, but maybe the larger agriculture value chain programs we do in multiple countries, is that often we try to work around, we say like, value chains, those create most of the impact for women smallholder farmers, and we do very well in terms of increasing productivity. But depends on the remoteness of those areas and how ready the market is to actually take all these producers is a big issue. For example, value chains like groundnuts and soybeans and many of the pulses it's a very good product in terms of increasing household nutrition. For example, the productivity, but the problem is that many of those value chains are not the traditional value chains that they have always produced, and there is not a system that actually can support farmers if they actually want to do it in the next seasons. So in the first season, we see a lot of adoption because we are working around it. But once we look into like the next season, we see a lot of women are discouraged because they can't sell the surplus in the market. And also if they want like different resilient varieties, it's actually the market is not ready. So we do have a lot of constraints like how to see those kind of impact sustaining over long time.
Okay, well, thank you, panelists. Before I open it to the audience, we have a respondent with us, Helen Bradbury, right? Yeah, I'm not good on last names. Helen Bradbury from ALCP Georgia. Many of you know ALCP, or Alliances Georgia. It's been around for quite a few years. I'll let Helen fill us in on details, but I would like to say it was one of the early M4P programs that was really struggling, not struggling, but really considering how to integrate women, and I believe mainstreaming women more than targeting women. Is that correct? But please explain the program, and I'd be interested in knowing, when you listen to the discussion here and some of the norms that were being dealt with and some of the challenges, after you give a mini background on your program, what were some of the topics that or issues that particularly resonated with you in your experience?
Yeah, okay. I think if any of you've read the case studies, about the program. Well, basically we're an agricultural program, work in livestock sector, but also we're pretty open and we do all sorts of things. Dairy is a big one of our things. So obviously if you're going to work in dairy, you end up working a lot with women, well in Georgia, as well as you've brought up in Bangladesh. Basically, when I came into managing this program, which is quite a while ago now, gender was really at the nascent stage, and as you referred, Linda, the operational guide was pretty basic. It was poor people, not even women and men at that point. And I came into it just thinking, well, I really like M4P and I really want to do it well. And basically, I think M4P done really well is M4P which benefits everybody, the whole target group. So that was really the ethos of going forward with a whole system of training for staff, making sure that this internalization of gender norms, understanding, things, having a staff that could respond in the field, getting the surveys right, getting the information right. So a lot of things are responding. Of course, business cases, of course, but for me, I don't even think about it sometimes as the business case. I just think of it as more what Stuart was discussing earlier, things that work. If you're in the right sector to begin with, if it makes sense to do it, then, that you follow those lines where, the golden seam, as it were. We do target women, actually, and we did from the beginning. So all the interventions are either gender sensitized, meaning you've got a really good gender analysis and gendered market analysis, and so where in your intervention you have to tweak it to basically get women as well as men. Or we have a gender targeted intervention, which is dealing with a cross-cutting constraint that we saw right across all the interventions, which was women's access to decision making. So basically, women were not in the communities, and bear in mind we're working in rural places where everybody's livelihood is based on milking cows, basically. Everybody's livelihood. So it's going to affect everybody. And women were not present in the local municipality. They weren't going there to use the public goods, the access to information, pensions maybe, programs from the government and stuff, or mainly in these annual community meetings where the municipal budget is basically planned. The villages come up with their priorities, and then then the money is spent. So if you go there and say, well, we want a football pitch, then that might go and probably will go into the budget for that year. Anyway, so we worked at government level with advocacy, but also at the grassroots level, at all levels. But we did policy. So we got gender advisors, worked with the Ministry of Rural Development and Infrastructure to appoint gender advisors in every municipality. It's M4P, it's gender and M4P. So you look at it, where are your entry points? What exists already in the system? And what we saw was basically that the laws are already there. They were already written into place. That, that in 2010, the gender laws was brought into place, but nobody knew how to do it. So you're working from that sort of pushing the levers straight away. And anyway, it's had really great success. Participation rates have gone up in these meetings from about, 0 to 5%, 15 to 20 in the first year, then 30 plus in the second. Things like, what have women voted for? Because people first said to me when I did it, how do you know what they're going to vote for? Well, I don't know what they're going to vote for, but I presume, as this is their life and this is their as Stuart was saying, this is their pain, this is their frustration. They'll vote for something they need badly. And they voted for running water in kindergartens. And then suddenly it makes sense, you know. Anyway, it's at all levels. We're working now on rolling it out nationally. We've just done an updated gender guidelines, which is training all these village reps, which are the very local arm of local government, in how to include women in community meetings. And can we as a program at this point do the direct causality between voting for running water and then our dairy interventions? Well, maybe not quite yet. But I don't even think that matters too much, because you know it's the same population. Anyway, we'll continue. So.
Okay. Great. Thank you, Helen. That's great to hear your story as well. So now we'll open it up to the audience. So questions for the panelists, comments, any of your own experiences, short, but ones you'd like to share that you think really illustrate how women can be integrated into M4P programs, mainstreamed into private sector development, and how you may have dealt with social norms. Particularly, it'd be good to focus on the social norms. That's really where we want to get at in this conversation. Please feel free to jump in.
The war in Liberia did one thing bad, but then they end up having a lot of, I guess, room for women to participate in the sector. What happened during the war, a lot of the men, you know what happened. I don't want to say. So a lot of the women who were working, their husbands were tappers, were working on farms, guess what happened? They couldn't tap anymore. So one thing that the farmers realized that was, at the lowest level of the farming, where the nursery is extremely important. This is the most delicate part. Where men normally were the ones who were managing the nurseries, women started to manage the nurseries. And what happened was, farmers saw that their yield increased in terms of the why. And it's a simple reason why. If a man decides that he wants to plant, he will dig a hole and he's going to stump the ground. If a woman wants to plant, she's going to take her time and she's going to stump it. Guess what happened? The rubber trees were protected. And what rubber farmers started saying was, this started now to encourage a lot more. Now, the reason why I mentioned this story is one thing I didn't hear was, I think when we're designing what is our interventions or looking at constraints, we definitely have to look at the commercial opportunities and identify those commercial opportunities. The second example I want to give is around trading with women in vegetables. The same thing. Men couldn't go outside, so women had to go out and find food at some point for communities, for their homes, for wherever. What happened was women started now trading. They started doing more of the trading activities. And what's happening in the vegetable sector, or even in some of the domestic palm oil sector, you find out that women are actually better negotiators. So what has happened now, the men have taken a lot of role back into core production and given it, whether it's to their wives or to the women in the village who now are the traders, to trade because they get better price. You know, sometimes as men, we don't have that much patience to hang around to negotiate, but they will sit there and they will negotiate. So when we start looking at working in the vegetable sectors, we started to target more women as traders because we realized that they have the patience, the capacity to be able to negotiate upfront, whether it's with the institutional buyer on contracts or on the lower end with producers, because they are in the they're in the best position to negotiate. These are just two little examples that I thought I should share with you guys when it comes to how, when you start to design, look at the commercial opportunities, and slowly these norms, whether it's within the household, it's at the business level, really do start to change. Because people, at the end of the day, everybody wants more money in the pocket. And at the household level, they see that, trust me, they will change the traditional norms. Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, we have a couple of questions here, and then I'll come back there.
And you, in terms of kind of the value along the coffee value chain, if you have to do work at the household level or the community level, can that be absorbed within that, or do you have to get other outside money to build that up, just practically?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that comes to the way Twin is a charity and a trading company. So we do receive funding from donors, as I say. What our idea is that coffee cooperatives, they run themselves as a business. So as our long-term idea is that they don't need donor money. But of course, not all of them are in the same situation. So we usually start with them when they are very new, so they don't export enough coffee to be able to maintain all these kind of activities, or just kind of just exporting maybe the first container or the second container. So at that point, we still need to subsidize some of the activities with donor money. As they grow up and they export more and more containers, there's a tipping point where they are able to sustain themselves, and they will not need. So we have this kind of framework that is 5 stages where they go one step at a time. And then we have also a system in our marketing activities that are quite costly for cooperatives to have a marketer working in the US market, one in Japan, one in that. So we have what we call joint market initiative, what is all our cooperatives in East Africa, they get together with Twin, and they put some money, depending on the volume of export, into these common pots for Twin to conduct all these activities on marketing, from defining marketing strategy to talk with buyers, to travel to the fairs and all this. So for smaller cooperatives, we need to put some money from the donors because they don't have enough volume to contribute to that. For bigger cooperatives, they are very happy to contribute a percentage of their export because they know they get a lot in return. Yeah.
Okay. We have 2 questions or comments here. Please.
Okay, thank you very much. I think as governments and development agencies strive to include as much as possible women in development activities, it should so much be elaborated that they are not discouraging men from where they have been. But because in many cases, the economies are operating at half the capacity, because you find only men are at the limelight and ladies are left behind. So in the process of bringing up ladies to contribute towards the economy, it should be done in such a way that men are not instead discouraged and we go back to the previous situation. I have just been imagining an organization or a trader who wants to say I will use the example of the coffee. The coffee for women is in this store and the coffee for men is in this store. And these are 2 people who possibly come from the same household, meaning that they are going to have 2 different gardens, and everyone will be saying, this is my garden, and remember they are working for holistic development of their household. So I see a rift there which must be bridged if the desired goal is to be achieved of having both of them contributing to the development of either their households or the entire economy.
So what happened now? You have the women's coffee, and then you have the kind of normal family coffee. How you deal with that? So this is all the activities we do at household level. So there is a need of a lot of conversations around that. But for them, it was a lot more simple than what we thought. So we thought, oh, it's going to be a conflict. And I say, like, I'm so happy. I mean, we have our farm that we work together. Then we have the women's coffee farm, where we get a lot of higher price because we have the women's coffee premium. And then I'm super happy. I'm the very happy husband. So I think that sometimes we come with the idea that it's going to create like big disruption. But when they see the business interest of that, money talks. I mean,
and actually, maybe I can give the corollary example to that, because sometimes we hear that when, and sometimes this is a big issue, but we hear that as things become more mechanized or a household income generating activity becomes more of a business, the men will take it over and that displaces women. And sometimes that does happen, but I think we have to be more nuanced about that. It's very context specific. And just to tell you about a little experience I had recently in Indonesia, out on one of the islands, I think it was Flores, and there the program I was working with was introducing improved breeds of pigs for fattening, and also the improved feed. And so the pigs were, instead of taking 2 years and, you know, hours and hours in fodder preparation, they were becoming fattened in 4 to 6 months. We won't get into how that happened in the feed, but anyway, that's another probably question. And so therefore it was much less work to get them to a stage where they could be sold. And the women were saying, yeah, and because it's so easy, the men have taken over. And I said, well, what do you feel about that? And they said, it's great. You know, it was a lot of work for us, you know, preparing the fodder and feeding the pigs and doing that for 2 years before we saw a profit. And now the men have taken it over. And I said, well, what about, you know, decision making around that income? And they said, well, in this case, and some people would be surprised to know this, in Indonesia, even though it's perceived to be very male-dominated in some ways, externally in public it is, but actually the women control all the income in the household. So they said it's great. They take care of the pigs, and we earn more money. Then they give the money to us. We make some decisions jointly, and if we can't agree, I give the bottom line. So I think we have to be very nuanced. We have to not accept received wisdom about what is and isn't going on in households. We have to talk to women. We have to talk to men. We have to really try to understand all the dynamics. And it doesn't take a lot of time. It seems like, wow, that would take forever. No, you know, if you have focus group discussions here and there, and you have a good baseline, and then you learn as you go along. We have a question here, and sorry, there was one back there, and then we'll come back to you afterwards. So 1, 2, 3.
Okay, my question I think was to all the panelists. I think it relates to decision making in the household. How far do gender mainstreaming programs influence decision making? We had another example in Zimbabwe where yes, the woman could make a decision to buy a car, but after buying that car, it was the men who took over utilizing that car. So how do you then address those barriers? And also, in cases where a man has got 2 wives, how do you also address that? Yeah.
Working with this women's association, one of the points they advocated on was that every time you give a loan to a man, he usually gets another wife or uses it to buy a car rather than improve his business. It was probably unfair, but there was an element in truth in it. As a business environment program, looking at policy and regulation, we do need to take a stock take sometimes and say how much do we want to get involved with changing social norms such as decision making in the home. I tend to focus on trying to increase the incomes of the beneficiaries and making sure they receive, they benefit from a policy change. Going beyond that, I think it would be beyond the remit of our program, but we should always just be making sure that we're not actually doing any harm. I think that my team around me, all my senior managers are female, though very intelligent, very smart, challenge me all the time on this, so it may change. but I'm quite conservative when it comes to getting too much into household decision making.
I think one of the tools we found very useful is to have those gender dialogues in the communities. I mean, regardless in Africa and in Asia as well, where there are very specific discussions around this sort of anomalies, whether there are a lot of polygamy or men are alcoholic, and so we found that the gender dialogues where you bring a lot of men's into those discussions and really talk about the different roles and the different kind of activities around the households, that really helps bring. It's not the most convenient discussion. It actually can spark out a lot of different areas, but we felt that the gender dialogues actually are quite helpful in the communities to actually address some of those, issues.
I think this is a really interesting one because it's at the heart of the women's economic empowerment debate, because also when we look at monitoring as well, have you had any impact or not, we have to go to the household level. But one of the things I wanted to say, which is very, very handy about using the local government thing, and when the women were allowed to vote, one of the great things about it was that we didn't go as an organization into the community and get involved in any dynamics. It was a publicly sanctioned, official sort of statement right there in public to say women have to join. And in Georgia, for example, there are huge mobility issues. You know, like people are, often women are not allowed out of the house unchaperoned. And how could we get around that? Well, frankly, if you've got village reps saying it is now, almost like a proclamation, government policy that the women have to come and vote in the meetings, you sort of get a public, you know, you're changing it in a way that's not endangering anybody because it's official. So, and I think many programs could use something along those lines on the local government level, because most of the laws are in place, maybe not being enacted, but they're there.
When Siddiqui and Kevin were giving their presentations, they were talking about how much women are now empowered to make decisions, but I know that in our African culture, it's very difficult to make a decision if you're a woman. So it's most probably going to cause gender-based violence. So when you're doing these interventions, are you also doing surveys to find out if you're causing any gender-based violence?
The 4 key areas of inquiry in our women empowerment work is around changing the norms at the community leaders level. Let's say who decides on land allocation, for example, and then also around men engagement, as I said, and then definitely around gender-based violence, because there is always a backlash in terms of how these changes are portrayed from in the household level. So as I was talking about the dairy programs and the different non-traditional roles that women were taking, there has always been a kind of negative impact, like whether she'll be allowed to continue in this role even though she was very successful. So engaging the communities and also, keep investing in those women, in kind of doing her work on a consistent level is also something that we found is really important. So yes, I think gender-based violence actually is a big issue that we cannot kind of avoid, and it's something that has to come as a kind of key inquiry areas when you do a lot of economic empowerment work.
I'm just going to add one comment, and then you can go. Yeah, and it's really interesting we're having this discussion, because in an M4P discussion we wouldn't, or a market systems discussion 5 years ago, we wouldn't be talking about gender-based violence and how does it impact our programming, how does our programming impact gender-based violence. And there's a tool that was created by DFID very recently. Was it Christine, you showed me that tool. Do you remember when it was, or?
Yeah, it's a 2-part guidance note on women's economic empowerment and gender-based violence.
Yeah.
To mitigate against.
Yeah.
In your programming, and it maps right to the M4P.
So it has the M4P donut illustrated, and then it shows the kind of the hot points for potential gender-based violence and how you can mitigate. So a tool like that might be useful. And actually, Oxfam has recently done a lot of work in some publications on women's economic empowerment and gender-based violence. So there are more resources available now, and they might spark some ideas or provide some connections that people can pursue.
My name is Nefas Munyeche. I am working for DAI in northern Mozambique. I am leading the implementation of an agribusiness, initiative, and at the moment, we are working with, close to, 15 private sector partners, along the value chain. I mean, in my interaction with, the different, private sector partners that we are working with, I have seen 2 categories of partners. There are some private sector partners that say to me, we want to include women in our business activities. but we don't know how to do it. How do we do it? And it has got me thinking that perhaps maybe as facilitators, we need really also to focus on business, to develop specific interventions that help business build the capacity of business, to include women in their business activities. So that is my first question to the panelists. What sort of interventions have you implemented, to prepare business actors, to include women in their business activities? That's my first question. The second one is the extreme end of this category of partners. There are some partners that say to me, look, I'm a for-profit organization, I'm not an NGO. I want to conduct my business in a manner that allows me to secure as much profit as possible, in a manner that allows me to reduce transaction costs. And what I have seen actually is that these partners, they need to be convinced. We need to have a more stronger value proposition, to enable them to realize the benefit of including women, in their business activities. So that is my second question. How have you engaged such hardcore private sector partners? How have you communicated the value proposition, to these, private sector partners who want, to clearly understand the benefit of including women, in their business activities? Thank you.
Business has been able to engage women enterprises. For me, this is the importance of an association of businesses, and particularly a women's association, is that they're able to come together and offer services to their members and advocate to other business groups and to government for change. So to give you an example, networking events and coalition building between a women's organization who's perhaps doing some weaving or some textile work with textile traders associations is where we've been able to establish those linkages, having the confidence of those women groups not only to lobby to government but to say to traders, I can offer you this product at X price at X quality. So using associations to build those networks, I think, is important. Also, much government activity often excludes women businesses. One of our partners was fairly successful in advocating that women's businesses should be invited to trade fairs, should be invited to tendering opportunities that government is working on. So bringing those businesses into the public eye as well.
And Christina, you wanted to add to that?
Yes, about the business proposition about women empowerment. I mean, for us, that was my initial point. In the coffee sector, is really a big business proposition. So we can prove that by, cooperatives who are including training of women in positions of leadership, they have improved massively in volume of coffee exported, in quality, and in number of members. So I think that the thing is to make the business case for that, so they really understand the business modeling around that. They don't need to work on women empowerment because they are kind of nice and social, and they may be for the business reasons, and then they may then conclude later, yeah, it really worked. So then it forced them to take more of a gender approach. But they can start just a business proposition, and there is a business proposition for that. Because like in coffee, they still work on coffee. They don't get the training. You don't get any focus. But the coffee they are producing will not be any good. So that is really proof that the moment you involve women in the training, in the quality, in the control and all that, the quality goes like up so many points. So they say, yeah, we want to do that. So it's really the business proposition, what is the driver, I think, more.
Yeah, and maybe I can just add to that. So in terms of motivation, I guess Christina is saying you can make the business case to those private sector partners. You're not selling women as suppliers, employees, or consumers. You're not selling them on a charitable basis. You're saying this is the business case. But as the NGO, actually that's a very important value add you could have, is exploring what is the business case. Is it they'll have greater supply? Is it the business partner will have higher quality? Are women going to be more reliable suppliers or employees? Are they going to have a new market segment into which they can sell their inputs or seeds? So I would say in the research and analysis of the NGO, that's the type of information that you can research and come armed to your business partner. And then in terms of helping those business partners engage with women, there is information out there. And if you look at the Women's Empowerment and Market Systems Framework, that's published in a couple of weeks on the Beam Exchange, you'll see there's actually some tools in there describing how a business or how an NGO or a business can make its activities more women-friendly. And it's some very basic pragmatic things, including things like location, timing, materials. So for example, if an insurance company is trying to sell livestock insurance, and we've seen this example in northern Kenya, and they want to reach women, well, the men in those communities are more literate than the women. So, and the men are herding the camel and the cattle, and the women are herding the goats and the sheep or the shoats. And the materials that you can use to sell to the men are different because they can have more narrative, but the materials you would use to promote or sell to the women would be more visual. So there's things like that that can be done where, again, the NGO can do the research and can facilitate that linkage between the private sector partner and women by providing the capacity on what is more women friendly, and there are resources available for that. And we have a question here and also another one here. And then I think after that, we'll have to wrap up.
Oh, yeah, thank you. First of all, it's a comment. I think it's good news to know that there is work going on in terms of developing guidelines to mainstream gender and to M4P. I think in the project we've been working is something we've been struggling with. How far can you go in M4P? How much can you influence your private sector partners? How much can you twist them to say, to change their thinking that what they want from this thing is a profit, and they don't care who is involved and all this. Some of them have tried. Some of them really want to incorporate it, but even in terms of the mobilization, it's the common tool is they call this same message goes, and you expect both females and males to come, but depending on the cultural context, you'll find that some communities even allowing a female to go for a meeting where there are men, it's another issue. So I think there are these things that possibly then you need to go deeper than that, maybe reach out to the households or maybe organize a different meeting. So I think it was good to learn. The other thing I just want to get clarification. I may have missed something on the explanation on the coffee, women in coffee business. I also want to tie it with the example that was raised by the colleague from Liberia about women and in vegetables, how much they have appreciated each other, that the men have known that the women are better salespeople, so they let them take the front. When it comes to coffee, you stated that these are people in the same cooperatives. What is it that you're giving more attention to give more training to women and ignore the men, or the men are just naturally shrewd, which is likely? But after, say, since that people have, now it has become clear that there's preference for women coffee and is earning a better price, would you also are you monitoring to say, like what's happening with the vegetables in Liberia? Do we see then men want to say, okay, if our wives are getting better prices, then let it all be sold through the women, and how does that play out at the household level?
Yeah, they are all very good questions. Just that today, my time is a little bit short to give more explanation, but just let me try to answer your questions. I mean, first on the women's coffee, there have been a lot of debates about why women's coffee and why not like just kind of balanced gender coffee or whatever. You know, it's like there have been a lot of debates because all this girls' methodology is all about working together. So it's about the household working together as a business together, and then at the end we say, then we take women's coffee. So what happened with all this working together, family, you know, happy, harmony and all that? So there is two reasons why we cannot do the kind of more gender balanced family coffee where at this high kind of telling the story about how they work together. It's because we need to trace that to who is producing the coffee. So for women's coffee, it's easier to separate and trace it all the way down to women. So from the market point of view, it's easier to say this is women coffee grown by women. That's saying this is coffee grown in harmony in a family or whatever, because it's very difficult to trace that. So that's one reason why we go to women's coffee. The idea of women's coffee is not at end. It's not an end product like with this. Okay, you have women's coffee, so everything is resolved. So the idea of women's coffee is an entry point. So you can empower women that anyway they are working on coffee production, but they are not getting the training that their husbands are getting, because as you all know, coffee is a men crop. That means men get the training, but women are doing the work. So then something is not right here. So that means men, they still having that position in coffee. But then women, they also have that position with the women coffee, so they can talk as equal with their husbands. So you see, it's a bit of a means to an end. So for example, if you see this publication, look for that in the knowledge arena tomorrow. We visit 7 cooperatives that they have women coffee products, and we try to understand why they have that, what are the impact on the relationships, all that. So you will find some examples of all that. Ideas of why we do women's coffee and no. For example, one cooperative, they don't want to go women's coffee. They are really much into gender balance, systems. And they found that work of working together brought the quality. This is Consojo in Uganda that brought the quality from 76 to 87.7, whatever, what is like super high quality. And for them, they don't want to do women's coffee. So it's not that they all need to go that way. It's a way to get to that balance in the women and men that they can work together. See.
Thank you very much. You've been hugely patient. I know it's been a long session in a strangely dark room and slightly overcrowded. I think it was a great discussion in the end. Some really good questions that came out. We're almost finished the day. Downstairs in 5 minutes, there's a closing plenary. It's only half an hour. There will be refreshments at the plenary, so there's no coffee break. But if you go down there, there's drinks available, and then we'll be wrapping up for the day. Thank you very much to your participation and to the panel.